You are what you do, not what you say you'll do. Artist Bill Anton. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. Your art lesson today comes from artist Bill Farnsworth. Now imagine this scene for a moment. Your feet are tired from walking the beautiful streets of the Mediterranean island of Elba. Your palate is thirsty, and just ahead you see bright umbrellas signal the presence of a small street cafe. You decide it's time to enjoy a refreshing drink under the cool shade of the cafe umbrellas while you rest your feet. As you approach to claim your seat, though you cannot see them, within the doors of the tiny cafe, workers clean and tidy up the cramped interior. You hear the sounds of clinks and clatter as they replenish and stock the pantry and refrigerator with the latest goods that just arrived before you eyed the cafe and decided to stop there. And as you sit down and you sip your favorite drink, for just a moment, you imagine you have lived here all your life. It is this story within a story that artist Bill Farnsworth seeks to imbue within his oil paintings. As a 1980 graduate of the Ringling School of Art and Design, Bill Farnsworth has spent more than 34 years as an illustrator and fine artist. Born in Connecticut in 1958, Bill spent most of his life there painting landscapes of the rural area while supporting himself and his family with his growing illustration career. Now, Bill has illustrated more than 50 books for children. His extensive illustration experience provides a rich vocabulary for creating his fine art paintings. He is a signature member of the Oil Painters of America and the American Society of Impressionists. He is also a fellow in the American Society of Marine Artists. And not only that, Bill is also an active member of the Plein Air Painters of the Southeast, having also served for a time as its president. In our conversation today, Bill explains how he endeavors to paint what he loves and to convey that honestly so that the viewer can feel that as well. Bill also talks about the importance of painting on location and being a keen observer of the scene and life that happens in that place. And the result of doing that, heartfelt paintings emerge that are full of emotion. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Bill, you live in Venice, Florida. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep. We've been here going on 25 years.
Oh, wow. My son lives in Cape Coral and his wife.
Okay.
Yeah, not too, I don't think that's too much further south.
Yeah, I'm a Connecticut Yankee, so I grew up with, the long, cold winters and gray days. And it was just, we came to Venice, we're vacationing in Sarasota, came down to Venice to look at homes. And the second house we looked at, we ended up buying. We had been in Venice for more than an hour.
1 hour. And this is home.
Yeah. Great. Well, we've been searching the Southeast for 3 years. And then we thought, my wife said, why don't we like vacationing in Florida? Why don't we just live here? So that seemed to make sense.
Let's snowbird early. Yeah.
Yeah, it's easy living because everything where I live in, everything is close by. It's 5 minutes to all the shops and restaurants and Home Depot, and 5 minutes to the beach, and 2 minutes down the street to my tennis club. And I love my home, and we put a lot into this place. And so it's a nice environment to hang out in and paint.
Oh, that's beautiful. Do you have a separate studio area for your painting?
Yeah, it's the old garage. I had to figure that out before I got down here to make sure I could work out of my studio with the deed restrictions in this neighborhood. So that took a little while. And finally they said, as long as you're not creating too much traffic and stuff, you can work out of your studio. So it's a 2-car garage, but there's 2 storage areas, and it's tight. I have to be very well organized, but it's a good setup. I mean, I've got a place where I can take my studies on after I'm going off on a long trip and come back and do studio works. Great.
I was reading your bio as you have it on your website, And you made an interesting quote, which really resonated with me. And I wanted to get you to expound on it a bit. But it said, you say, my goal with my work is to paint what I love and convey that honestly so the viewer can feel that as well. And I want to explore that. What do you mean by that? Convey that honestly. How is that accomplished?
I think you have to approach your work honestly without a lot of gimmicks and say, well, this is what I felt today. Sometimes I'll have the title before I even start painting.
Really?
And there's sort of a, an emotional language that we all understand about, maybe a sunset or, something. There's a storyline that I like to play up. Maybe that's the old illustration background. But I think that's important, and people, it resonates with them. They see something that they can recognize, and I think what I like to inject in my paintings is patterns of light and the design it creates and emotion. So that's how I want to try to connect. There is definitely a storyline that pulls people in. They can imagine walking into that painting. I also like to say that I'll start the story and let them finish it.
So am I understanding this correctly? So when you say, convey it honestly, I heard you talk about gimmicks and things like that. I mean, what kind of gimmicks would a painter might fall prone to that would take them away from that goal?
Well, I think maybe getting away from your emotional response and maybe going too heavy on technique, where there's some beautiful paintings out there that are extremely skillful, but for me, they might leave me a little flat. And I'm a painter, not a renderer. And it's a tough one. Guess it's a personal thing maybe, but I think you can fall into traps where you're maybe paint the same thing over and over again because it's
right.
going to sell, or you're trying to just build a whole painting based on a technique. You can't express yourself unless you have a certain degree of skill, and that's sort of the language of art. It's like I use this analogy a lot, where you might go to another country and you don't know the language. How can you express yourself properly if you don't know the language? So you learn the language, you learn the skills of painting, and you can express yourself much clearer and get the message across.
That's a good analogy. I like that.
Yeah, I've talked about that to students before, and that it's an ongoing thing. It's not just something that kids think that they go to art school for 3-4 years and they come out the other end and they're suddenly they've arrived. There's no arrival. There's no depot when it comes to your art career. It's just an ongoing thing, and you get better at it, and you find yourself more insightful, and that's the real joy of painting.
Well, maybe that's why I was struggling with it a little bit, because I'm thinking, I don't know, I don't quite know how to do that yet, because I'm really early in the process of learning to paint. The idea of emotions conveyed in a painting. For example, I looked at one of your paintings. It's a very striking painting. It looks like an outdoor cafe scene, bright yellow umbrellas with light coming through it, the turquoise blue tables waiting for me to put my stein of Guinness on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way I felt, because it resonated with a memory that my wife and I had in our travels. So I don't know I don't know how far off base I am with that, but that's the emotion it evoked in me.
Yeah, I think everybody feels that. You see an umbrella. If you go to a cafe scene, you see an umbrella up or down. An umbrella up is an invitation. It's shade. It's get out of the hot noonday sun and have a glass of wine or beer and relax at a place you want to be. I don't want to paint something where you don't want to be there and you're afraid and feel the painting should be a little bit of escapism, you know?
Yeah.
You know, that's something that is you know, it's different with everybody. I mean, that scene's fairly straightforward, but some scenes may be that, well, people just absolutely love the light in it. But a lot of times it reminds them of something that they did in their lives, and it stayed with them, and to have that to look at, it just makes a better. I think art makes life better. I've got paintings from friends that, you know, none of us can afford our own paintings, so we trade.
Yes.
I've got a number of trades. Every morning I wake up and I could see these beautiful works of art, and it's a good part of life.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I look at your paintings and I see that light is a dominant quality of that. So what is the role of light in telling your story when you're creating a painting?
Well, it definitely conveys a sense of the time of day and the atmosphere. It could be soft light or real strong late light. I mean, I love the strong late light because your colors really separate the light areas where the sun's hitting gets very warm and shadows get real cool, and so it creates a little more emotion there. But it's being able to capture that. If you can be on the spot, that is essential, I think.
Being on location.
Yeah, painting outside, never thought about it. My friend and I, I'm working on an illustration project. He's working on something, and he's an illustrator. And we said, we ought to go out and set our easels up and go out and paint outside. And we threatened to do this for like a year. And finally one day I said, you know what I did today? He goes, what? I said, I went out and set up my easel and painted. It was a crummy one, but it was a start.
Funnily enough, my first one was a crummy one.
Yeah, believe it or not, yeah. You know, it's if you can be good in the field, you'll be great in studio. Yeah, it always goes that way because it's the hardest thing to deal with, and it's taken a lot of years and just hard work. I mean, when I'm at a plein air event, I might paint as many as 3 paintings in a day, sometimes 4, and it's absolutely exhausting. It's a great feeling of exhaustion, but you know, I get them in the frames, get back to where I'm staying, and pop a painting in the frame and sit back and look at it and see if I need to go back on location the following day. And a lot of times I do with bigger ones, and yeah, that's.
But that's a lot of pressure. So you're at a plein air event and you produce 3 or 4 paintings. Those paintings are end products in themselves. They're meant to be displayed and sold, right? Right. I button them up. If it requires more than one day, then, you know, I'll go back. If the light has changed, you know, say if it's overcast the next day, then you're going to have to rely solely on your memory. So what I try to do in the first hour is establish the warmest warms and the coolest cools, and the you know, the obviously the drawing composition and everything. But to get those certain notes of color, you don't have to have it finished, but you have to have that information there. And then you get back out in the field maybe the next day, and hopefully the lights is not right, then you can still finish it by memory. And it's amazing how much we remember when we get out there. There was a collector that bought a small plein air painting from Charleston, and they asked me if I would write a little paragraph about what I remembered of the day. Wow! And which is kind of nice. And I ended up writing a full page, and it was exhilarating because all those things were in me and my brain, but they came out in the painting. A lot of things that made a difference in the painting were knowing what was inside this building that was at 200 feet or 300 feet away, and going in and talking to the guys inside. And it was a bait shop, and there was a mascot dog there. There was an old guy named Rabbit who was giving fishermen their shrimp, and then the owner showed up, and there was all this stuff going on. And there's something to be said about
being out on location for 2 hours and watching stuff happen. You're out there, and if you just think about it as like a tourist arrive at a spot in a beautiful vista, they take 2 snapshots and they leave. An artist is out there for 2 hours. And I don't care even if you don't paint, just sit there for 2 hours, you will begin to understand the scene, the area, and from understanding comes empathy. And that finds its way into your painting that a photograph can't give you.
I like that. From understanding comes empathy. It's almost like these paintings, your paintings, have a front story or a main story and a back story. Then I like that. This is fascinating. No one's ever told me this before, where they sat down and wrote the back story. I can. So going back to the cafe with the umbrellas, right. My story is the feelings that I got from it. Here's a place that's inviting me to sit down with my wife and share a beer or wine. Yeah. But because you were there for a long time, you've got a backstory to that. The bicyclist that went by, the ice cream truck that went by, all these different things happening, the life that was happening around it. Right.
Nobody, if the person just came by and took a look at that picture, unless they had gone in there, they wouldn't know that there was a guy named Rabbit in there.
Right.
And I've thought about this for the last couple of years for writing blogs and just spoke at the plein air convention about that. For a lot of people jumping on into the plein air movement, art movement, a lot of people are retired and they've always wanted to paint, and they're getting out there and painting. And I think it's something where they can slow down in their life, and really it's, I don't want to be corny, but stop and smell the roses type of thing. Where you
do have paintings of roses, that are quite beautiful. Yeah.
Next up, roses.
Yep.
To absorb an area and sit there for a while. I've told my students the best way to learn about painting water is just sit with a chair and look at it and understand the hydraulics, and just watch and be observant. That will teach you more about painting water than trying to wing it. I see, artists out there trying to paint plein air waves, and it's almost like they're trying to chase each wave.
Yeah, guilty as charged, man.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I did too. You try to it's moving, and oh my God, it's gone. But it repeats itself, so you have to think about that.
What's one of the best experiences you've had in plein air painting?
Well, I've had a lot of them, and there's more probably so times where you just kind of say, well, it was a good exercise. But recently I was in Texas painting at Texas Plein Air, and we got out to this place called the Hummingbird Ranch, and the first old limestone road that I went back to this creek, which was where it was the headwaters of the Concho River. Was absolutely stunningly beautiful. Old 300-year-old oaks everywhere, and just the light was incredible. And it was a time of year where the grasses were turning. Well, it's kind of dry out there anyway, so the grasses were kind of golden. You had a lot of color, and especially in the riverbeds. And so I painted one in the morning, small one, so as a sort of a warm up of the road, and then went down to the river, painted the river. They brought me lunch, and they had, the ranchers had their family down there. So there were some plastic chairs sitting around. I sat down, finished my painting. They brought me lunch, and I sat by this beautiful river, and it was about, maybe 68 out. It was like no bugs, dry, perfect weather.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I just, sometimes you just have to pinch yourself that, man, how lucky am I? And, I drove a lot of miles to get there, but it was worth every bit. And then did another painting after that, which was a great experience. And so the end of the day, the light it's about 4:30, and the light was getting low, and it just, this one scene was just absolutely stunningly beautiful. And I photographed it, and I was too tired to paint it. So on the way out, I asked the ranchers if I could come back and paint. And they gave me the gate code, and I came back the next day and planned it all out and knew when the light was going to be great. So I arrived a little early, maybe 3 o'clock, set up and got my block in done. So then by 4:30 or 5, the light hit exactly like it did the day before. And everything went seamlessly. It was a big painting. It was 18 by 24, which is large for me. But I could see everything perfectly. There was absolutely the most quiet, beautiful scene. No bugs, just perfect temperature. And, sometimes you get a lot of glare when you're painting outside, and dark passages, you might see a lot of reflection, but it was nothing like that. It was like I was in an outdoor studio. It was a spiritual experience. And there's not many times like that are just like that, where everything was falling into place. And so I called the painting All's Well. The title will sometimes just jump out at me. And, I like putting titles on because it to start off, if you have a title right away, it kind of keeps your eye on the prize. And it's just keeps me focused. But sometimes it happens after the painting's done.
Is it, so which case was it with this one? Was it afterwards or at the beginning?
I think it was toward the end, the feeling that I got, because it was in the beginning, the blocking I was struggling. What was happening was the sun was going across over the top of me and hitting the limestone road behind me and creating all this glare. And so I couldn't see. And I'm thinking, oh, this scene is just beautiful. It was frustrating, so I just turned my easel the other way so I could see and get the blocking done, and then everything settled down. So it was toward the end. Another painting like that happened in Stuart, Florida, last year when I was painting for the lighthouse paint out. The house I was painting was on this bay in Stuart, and it was like a old Victorian. But I was looking. I was on the road looking at the back of the house. And the owner came out and said, well, back in the days before there were roads here, and this is back in the 1900s, that the front of the house faced the water because that's where people would come in. And so the title became Before the Roads.
I've been to Stuart. Yeah, I can visualize the place.
Yeah, there's still some old buildings left, and it's got the old Florida feel.
So painting outdoors, you mentioned earlier a challenge that we can have. Light is changing. We may not be able to stay at a particular location for whatever reasons. So you do use photographs to augment the contemplative observations that you make on the scene. How do you incorporate photography in your paintings?
Well, first off, if I use photography back in the studio for my own gallery paintings. I don't use any photography when I'm at a plein air competition because obviously they don't want you to do that. But it's really if I can't get the necessary information out there from the best reference, which is the naked eye, then I don't have any no business being there. So when I go back to the studio and I'm at an event, I'm a prolific photographer. I take lots of shots because I think about, well, even if I don't sell a single painting at the plein air event, I have lots of great photographs. I just finished a large painting of goats under an old oak tree at this ranch. And I knew that was going to be something that I wanted to paint. And so, but it would have to be a studio because the goats are moving all around. Looking at the photographs were totally washed out. what happens in high contrast situations, the darks get real inky and the lights get washed out and you lose all the color.
Are you using your like a smartphone or something like that to take photos, or do you have a camera dedicated to it?
I have a good Nikon. My iPhone will take some pretty good shots, so I use both. If I'm in a spot where my camera is back in the car, I'll use the iPhone. But you have to understand, you have to rely on the memory. And also, I had on the same ranch, I had painted some of these trees with the shade underneath them, so I knew the value structure and color, and I was able to use that to augment when I went into the studio and make those adjustments right away. I think in the old days before I was out there doing any kind of plein air, I would just be faithful to the photograph and render the heck out of it, and it just came out with no feeling. So you got the photography is sometimes the photographs are spectacular if it's fairly even light, but you get that problem with photography where the lights get washed out, and it's usually high contrast areas. Right. The dynamic range is limited. Right. But and more recently, I've been relying more on my studies, and yeah, I'll go back to the photograph and see if there's something there. Maybe it's a structure or the shape of something that you can use to make the painting better. But nothing's better than what I can record with the naked eye, given an hour or two right there. There's a lot of little subtleties that you lose with photography. And, it's taken me a while to understand that. And it's kind of, I worked backwards. And I was an illustrator, so I was heavily into photographs and trying to do something fairly quick and accurate. When I get out into the field, I think the best thing to do if you go to an event or you're just painting around your own property or in your own town is to scout out and get an understanding of the light, take lots of photographs, all different ways. I see something that's really compelling, I stalk it and take photographs from upside down and backwards and vertical, horizontal. That's why I have thousands and thousands of photographs, because I just overkill everything. It's important because it's information that I can use. And then when I get back home, I'll say, well, okay, the great light here was 9 a.m. So I'll show up, and this works for morning paintings. I'll show up at 8 a.m. because you can block in your shadows. And being that I paint in oil and it goes from dark to light, you paint from dark to light, then you start blocking in your darks, and then when the light your showtime comes, you're all set. And it's a great way to plan ahead and not lose the light, because if you set up at the 9 o'clock hour, by the time you're set up, you've already lost half the light. Thinking ahead and planning, I think, is really beneficial. I think painting is it's a memory exercise. I've been trying to study and see what I can find. Why is it that a study may be more effective in some scenarios, and why photographs can be a tool and also could be a hindrance? And it seems to be related to perception and memory. Yeah, it is. Your observation skills get better. Your memory gets sharper. My draftsmanship skills get better because I have to put it down right the first time. And the editing skills get better because you learn how to simplify. And you come into, there's always problems in every painting. And hopefully you see them early on and you can say, okay, well, I've handled this thing before. It could just be like a tree with, just a smattering of leaves on it. How do I simplify that instead of making up this stick with polka dots all over it? That helps you really learn to edit and get the essence down of what you're looking at. Because in the studio, you get, it's just luxurious, Yeah, it is. The light stays so nice and just perfect. But the studies, I've got a lot of them stacked up, and it's great to refer back to those, to the color, because I'll get my photographs back and I'll just be so disappointed, like everybody is, looking at them, that, man, I just remember this so much more vivid and just richer color, and what's going on here. And so, that's why we paint outside.
Now, do you do any sketching? You've mentioned your studies, painting, but do you ever sketch?
Yeah, sometimes. I started doing it for about a year, and then I said, I just want to jump into it. So if I'm not sure and I want to play around with some values, I'll usually just work with just like a monochromatic tone and kind of do about a 3-value block in to see the pattern, light and dark patterns. Because if the light and dark patterns hold together, then you're going to have a good painting. But if it's just fragmented, like walking into the middle of the woods with a million different dappled things bouncing around with no real strong value structure, then the painting will fall apart. Maybe I'm impatient. I just, I see it and I get excited. I want to just get into it. And so I'll just, if I'm not quite sure, I'll just use some thin neutral color, just brown or something, and just see how it works out. That helps a lot.
You've mentioned that you have a background in illustration. Mm-hmm. How long have you been working as an illustrator or worked as an illustrator?
Well, I think it was about probably 10 years ago, maybe more, 12 years ago, that I was pretty much out of it. A lot of what I did was children's books. And so I illustrated about 60 books for kids. 60? Yeah, it's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work, man.
Yeah, you're bound to get better if you just look at the volume. So traditionally children's books didn't pay a lot, but you got to control the whole package, and somewhere around the early 90s there was a need for representational painters for nonfiction books like George Washington at Valley Forge and so forth. And so I've always loved history. That was perfect for me. And I like getting into the real stories and painting that stuff. So it forced me to really learn how to draw and work quickly on a deadline. But the children's books weren't like a magazine deadline or an advertisement deadline. I mean, I had like a year to do the book.
How many paintings would be in a book?
Well, maybe 16.
Yeah.
Sometimes I could do an entire book in 6 weeks.
So who dictated how those illustrations would be done? Did you have a lot of creative license and leeway with that? Well,
in the beginning of the sketch stage, what I did was do these little small oil paintings. It was just as quick as doing a pencil sketch. So, and I'm using value and color, so they got excited when they saw these because they could get a sense of the palette that I was using. It got me a little closer to and I could also sell what I was trying to get to. Easier. If they were on board, then I had a lot of control. But it's an editor. You're dealing with an editor. There's a designer comes in later, but there's sometimes I'll get feedback from the author if I want. But most of the time, I think the publisher wants to have control over the end product. Once it got going, there were usually very few revisions, because they knew what they were going to get. Most of the time with these little sketches, they say, well, can you do another? What I would do is then go to a pencil or a charcoal drawing layout on the canvas that I was doing the finished painting on, and then they could see, okay, this kid is actually going to be cute and and have eyes, nose, ears, and mouth. And then I could just paint direct from that. Which, I would do anyway. So it was a good system, I think. It worked out, and publishers, obviously, they were happy with that. But I did books. I did about 6 books on the Holocaust. And wow. Man, I could only do one of those a year. That'd be an emotional drain, I would imagine. Yeah, because when I did that type of subject matter, and I spoke about this a lot at schools and colleges and stuff, that I wanted to be, in a heavy subject matter like this, I wanted to be brutally honest, but with a window of hope. Now, that window of hope and those type of things is the heroes they're writing about. Irena Sendler, all those heroes that Janis Korsak, who went to Auschwitz with the orphans and died there with them. They're inspiring stories, and yet you got to give them, you got to give the kids the truth first, but like I said, with a window of hope.
You made me think about an experience I had in South Dakota years and years ago. I met this older man. He was a veteran in the Army, but he was one of the first American soldiers into one of the concentration camps there.
Right.
And he had taken photos, and he insisted that I look at these photos. I have to admit, I was deeply disturbed, but he had to get it off his chest, what he saw.
Yeah. Well, my dad was in World War II. He was in Europe, and they had freed some of the camps.
Oh, wow.
And it was a lot to absorb for a 19-year-old man.
I can't even begin to imagine.
No. But I think it's important for kids to know that this stuff actually happened, and that if you've had a bad day in school, okay, multiply that by 1 million, and you're a kid fighting for your life in the Holocaust. And it puts perspective on that this type of thing can happen again. So I think that's the value of these type of books. I donated all the art to the Simon Wiesenthal Center for 2 books. One book that I did about Janis Korsak is at the St. Pete Holocaust Museum, and then Irena Sendler. That work, they actually had it framed up and it's hanging there at it's the Southwest Florida Holocaust Museum.
Where is that? Where's that located?
In Naples.
Naples. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And I did several talks down there.
Wow.
And, I might talk to maybe 10, 12 people. They hang on every word because a lot of them had maybe parents that were, or relatives that might have been lost, or they're connected somehow, or they might have been kids. One guy came up to me and said he was in the concentration camps, and so it's pretty amazing stuff. So I think these books have a great value because it's documenting this, and there's stories about how depraved man can be. Yet during a time of horrible circumstances, you get heroes that, rise above this. And you look at history and the good has always come to the surface. That's where the heroes come. You never want to miss the heroes where they are, because sometimes they're just the school teacher that nobody really thinks about.
So this background that you have in illustration, how has that experience shaped your approach to your fine art painting?
Number one, learning how to draw. It was, and the greatest motivation that is known to man is fear. And if you got your mortgage due, you will figure out a way to draw this little kid and 16 images and make it all look consistent and happy and cute. And you figure out a way. You become extremely resourceful when your back is up against the wall. And when I went in full-time illustration, my wife was pregnant with our second daughter, and we had a 15-month-old. And so it was precarious, to say the least.
Oh, I feel you, man. I do. You and I are about the same age and similar histories, though not similar fields. And yeah, having children can put the fear in you. You want to provide for them. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It motivates you. What are you doing this for if you're not doing it for your family?
I've talked to a number of artists who were professional illustrators, and they do have a unique approach to their art. You can see that the skill is, the thing is, I don't have 35 years to pick up those skills.
Yeah, it's just the first 35 years is the hardest thing.
Yeah.
But, with the illustration, that you have to have that drawing skill, but it also taught me the business side, which is something that a lot of fine artists might have picked up, but you learn it pretty quick when you're dealing with that you're not the sole producer of the painting because you're being directed, and you've got to learn about how to produce a painting and make a profit. Yeah,
and that's the struggle, isn't it?
That is a struggle. I mean, these, I don't know how some of, those artists out there, they're going from paint out to paint out and selling paintings for $400. And yet they've got their expenses. By the time they get done with framing expenses and meals and all that, they've made $20 on a painting. You gotta think about it as a business. And I'm not a business minded person at all. Money just.
But you've learned a few lessons along the way.
Well, yeah, because my pockets get empty very quickly, so I have to figure out.
Well, there is that. So how do you fill your pockets there, Bill?
Yeah. Oh, it's the events, galleries, teaching. What illustration taught me to do is hustle, hustle, hustle. So I'm constantly planning ahead. I probably take a third of my time to plan events. And so I've already got 2020 just about completely filled up with little pockets of those impromptu things that happen all the time. I'm into 2021 planning, because if you don't have, something going on every month, then you're going to be standing around twiddling your thumbs and hoping for the phone to ring or email, and usually that doesn't happen. But if you get out there and treat the business sort of like in a lot of different directions, like fingers going out in several different directions, and you're bound to hit something.
Yeah,
it's sort of like a sawed-off shotgun. You might be able to hit something, with that as opposed to single bullet. So you got to go out and spray the area and try to pick up something. And by being out there, maybe at a plein air event, you might get lucky and win an award. You might sell some paintings, and things happen when you're out scratching around and turning over every rock. There was one of the great illustrators, Marshall Arisman, had given a talk at Ringling one year, and kid asked him, what do you think? The kids want, the secret recipe or something. And then he says, well, the successful illustrator is one that will do what others aren't willing to do. Not break the law, but to turn over every stone, to stay up 1 hour later, to put a little extra time. Yeah,
I agree with that. Yeah.
Every little thing makes a difference, and some of the things, all the things that, the fun stuff is actually painting, but the hardest stuff is that promotion, constant promotion, and today with technology, it's a lot about social media and reaching out with newsletters and keeping the website fresh. All that stuff, I had no idea 20 years ago. I mean, it's changed rapidly, but you have to do all that stuff. Sometimes I go out and I put 4,000 miles in my car this fall.
4,000 miles, wow.
Yeah, I travel all the way out to Texas and back and up, down, everywhere. And it was successful. I mean, it wasn't as.
Well, how did you define success in that case? What are you?
Oh, I made money.
Okay.
I paid my bills. I definitely made money, but I'm always hoping for more. So you always shoot for the best, and you come somewhere in the middle maybe. And it's one of my plein air friends had said, he went on the circuit, kind of just doing an event every month or two a month maybe. And he just decided that's what he was going to do. And he said, well, at the end of the year, it works out. The numbers work. And that's how you have to look at it. But, a lot of these events in certain gallery areas can become easily oversaturated. And today there's a glut of art on the market. So it's definitely a buyer's market. So any way you can make yourself different, make yourself stand out is important. Whether or not it's, being part of an organization or trying to elevate yourself somehow, because we're now competing with dead artists who apparently they don't bury the art with the artists. So that's not good.
Boy, some of these auctions are just out of this world.
Yeah. Well, I saw one of my own paintings sold for peanuts. And so.
Well, you're not dead yet.
I'm not even dead. Well, my ongoing joke is what I tell the galleries, just tell the collectors that I'm not feeling well and that any day now, you better buy now.
Ground floor opportunity. Yeah.
He didn't look good. He didn't look good. So then you have sellout shows for the next 20 years and people are like waiting for you to die. And he's like, man, he's recovering really well. I don't know what's going on with him.
So what are the things that you focus in on that help your bottom line? It sounds like events is a big part of that.
Yeah, workshops I try to space out because I want to do so many workshops that I lose my studio time.
Right.
You can set up your month with an event going on, whether it's a workshop, paint out, or having a show at a gallery. And then there's the variables that always come into play. You get that collector that comes to you and wants a commission done or something, but it's a matter of it's something you can't plan on. So it's those variables are always nice, but I think, and that you think, wow, how lucky am I? But I think a lot of luck is about what we did yesterday and all that other stuff. I think luck is a made thing, and that the more you do, somewhere along the line, you held the door for somebody, it might come back around. Not that I would do it holding a door for somebody as, well, I might be able to sell a painting to this person. But, all these things and working in a positive way in your life accounts for luck. Or people say bad luck. Well, yeah, some stuff just happens that, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. It just didn't work out. The market was bad or whatever. You brush yourself off, and then you just get back in the game. The disappointment was a big thing in illustration. So we had lots of it, but for every success, it wipes away about 100 disappointments. And that's kind of the mode that I'm in. I can't stop and sit back and reflect. It's just not in my DNA. I just can't. I've got to always work hard, and that's the way it is. It's not that it's become ingrained, and that started with the illustration. It's invigorating because I can control my own day and my destiny. I often say that if the bus is going off the cliff, at least I want to be driving. I don't want to work for a corporation and then, for 30 years, and then they can you before you reach retirement.
Well, so you got the business sense from freelancing.
Sure.
I think that's a great training ground to do. It can be frustrating at times, but there is a measure of freedom. And I think this applies to just about anything that you do. I was a software developer for many years, so much of my business was done in my business. So, I was just gainfully unemployable.
Right.
I couldn't handle employment.
I don't think I am not employable.
Yeah,
I'm convinced of that.
I tried, man, but I just couldn't do it. But being in my business, and I didn't like business. I got to be frank. All I wanted to do was code. And then as my career morphed into graphic design and web development and then video production, all of those things, I still just wanted to do those things. Right. Focusing in on the business side was excruciating, but it was necessary. You had to do it. So I did pick up some skills with it. Was I the best? Right. Absolutely not. And I still struggle with it to this day because I would prefer to create than to have to worry about it. But, you got to do it.
Yeah, you gotta. Well, there's the down part of this business, and there is the why we do it. It's the fun. I mean, when I used to go to schools and give talks, one little kid was in the front row, and I think it was like I was talking to second graders, and he didn't ask a question during the whole time, and finally, at the end, he raised his hand. He says, "You mean you get to stay home and color all day?" and I've been thinking about that for the last 35 years. I love that because if I ever griped about the business, I could just fall back on that little boy's comment
exactly.
that I get to stay home and color all day. I don't have to put on a coat and tie. I can just sit in my jammies all day and color. And I like that.
I like it too. I like the flexibility. What it gave me was I got to spend time with my children as they were growing up.
Yeah.
No one dictated when I worked. They couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to go leave the house. I had a studio. Oh, you'll like this one. My first studio was an embalming room.
Oh, dear. What a wonderful smell.
It was just an old funeral home, and they had this back storage area, and the locals used to call it the old blue room because it had a blue light on in there for the formaldehyde. and it was creepy. But I didn't care because this was like free rent, and my dad gave me the space to work in, and I had it all set up, and I didn't have to, because I was surveying for about 8 years to get my illustration career off the ground. You were a surveyor. Yeah, so I was working for my dad's land surveying company for at least 8 years, and finally, smarter people would have found something better to do. But, I said, well, it's what I'm going to do. It's who I am. Yeah, I didn't care. I'd work sometimes at night in there, and it could be, your imagination could run away with you. And I turned on a space heater that was connected to the electric of an apartment above me. And when I turned the space heater on, or she flipped her iron on, her fuse box would shut down, and she come walking down the steps because the fuse box was in my studio. But that first studio was, I did not care that it was creepy, or and everybody would freak out, and just get, oh my God, how can you paint in here? I'm painting. You can't imagine. I mean, not being outside and having to, do something that involved numbers. And I mean, we used to trek through 3 feet of snow, up and down mountains. And it was the worst thing in the world. And I think that was important for me to have that type of job, because I tell my students that, you got to have a job somewhere in the beginning when you're trying to get your illustration career off the ground. And let's hope it's a job that really, really sucks. Because if you like it and you like the money, then you'll fall into it and you'll build a lifestyle around that, and you can't leave, and you won't be you'll lose your illustration career. Yeah, it took me about 10 years. And then the first book project I had was the Old and New Testament for a children's Bible, 150 illustrations.
Wow.
So that was, I had my dad pose as Moses, party in the sea. So I had a bunch of these just like bathrobes that I would put on them. And
So now when you were doing the illustrations, like when you illustrated the Bible and also the children's books, you may have mentioned it, and I probably just missed it, but what medium were you working in to create?
Oh, I was working in oil.
So that was all oil.
Yeah, and I was working, in the old days, I was working on linen, and when, Frederick's Antwerp linen was cheap, and I do all my illustration on that. And so when price of linen went up, I started working on cotton duck, and but I would work on, flexible. I wouldn't mount the canvas, so because they needed flexible work that they could put on a drum scanner.
Right.
And so I would roll up 16, 18 illustrations in a PVC tube and ship them out that way.
Nice.
And that's the way I work. I did a book about it was David and Goliath for Time Life books. So I had my friend come by and his neighbor's kid come by. So Dan, my friend Dan, was a big guy, 6'6", and his neighbor's son was, 13 years old. So he played a good David. And so I've got David in like a little kind of robe with a belt and, short with a headband on. And I was posing too, so I had some sort of get up on. If anybody had come into this studio at that time, then we're shooting this at night. So there's two grown men with a 13-year-old boy, and this did not look good.
So you were taking photographs, right? So photographs were being taken so you could work from those. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And another one I did, I think I did one for Time Life, was Jesus and the Children.
Yeah.
And so I had like a cattle call of all our friends show up in robes out at this park. And it looked like it was some sort of cult convention or something. It was hysterical.
You wrote in one of your blog posts a story about Bill Anton. Bill Anton is the first professional artist I ever met in my life.
Wow.
And it was quite by accident.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing art direction, not creating art. I don't know, when you do an album cover design, they called it art direction. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was looking at art for an album cover for a musician. They had hired me to do a job, and I was in Wyoming at Jackson, Wyoming.
Yeah.
And I came across art galleries, and I said, well, I'm going to go. I'd never been in an art gallery before. This is back in the early 90s.
Wow.
And I went into an art gallery, and I just saw this amazing artwork. Unfortunately, none of it was suitable for the album cover, but it was just fantastic. And I think that's where my desire to learn how to paint came. And there was this man, he had a black vest and pants and black cowboy hat on. And so I went up and introduced myself, and it was Bill Anton. So I had a brief chat with him at that time, but I did not know who he was or just where he ranked in the artwork. It took me many years to find out just what kind of artist he was. I mean, I remember the gallery. It was just phenomenal. It was incredible. But you mentioned watching him paint a demo.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating.
Tell us about that.
Well, I had gotten a chance to help out the folks at the Forgotten Coast at the plein air convention in Tucson one year and at their booth. And so I just got to schmooze around. And saw Bill Anton walk in and definitely did a V line over because he's one of my favorite artists. Whose work is if I won the lottery, he'd be one of the top 4 artists I'd probably buy because it's his work, and it's not just the subject. It's just the paint quality and skill level and what he does. So I walked up to him and I said, well, I see a lot of James Reynolds in your work, and he got very emotional about James Reynolds.
Really?
Yeah, he said, James Reynolds I believe James Reynolds did movie posters back in the 70s and maybe earlier, but he was a prolific painter and illustrator and had great skill. He was such a great colorist in how he simplified shapes, because you could look up close at the old James Reynolds paintings and all you saw was just abstract shapes, and you stand back and the thing falls together and like a symphony. That is very hard to do. Well, and Bill said he did mentor with him, and that he was very close to him, which I thought was very interesting. So Anton when he did his demo on the big stage, there was about 600 people, and I found a front row seat because I was going to pepper him with questions. And he liked that because he liked fielding questions from professional artists. And so he worked up this painting through, he threw out these old, studies, plein air studies of horses. Now, a horse is hard enough to paint, let alone something on the spot. But, the horse was maybe tethered, or this one was happened to be sitting, and then he created a sculpture of the horse from clay and then put light on it. And so he had the color from the horse that he wanted to use, and then he had the shape and lighting on it from the sculpture. And then he had some other studies that he was going to use for the background. And it was just sort of this mishmash stuff that he used, and started slapping the paint on, and it's dripping all over the place. And he uses like yellow ochre to block in and sketch out because it's fairly light, dries quick. So, and he did this stunning painting. At the end of the painting, he just took a wet paper towel with mineral spirits, wiped the whole thing off, and people were, he
wiped the painting.
Yeah. Students were just stunned, and I love that, because he says this is just an exercise, and it finally sunk in, and everybody stood up and applauded. So they understood what he was getting at. A lot of the artists, they do a demo, you want to sell the thing, but he's at a pretty lofty spot. Yet, I think in his career, his work, should be twice what it's going for. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
And if I had the money to buy his art, that I would definitely, not that I'm looking to cash in on value, but I just think that his contribution to American art is up there. I used to look at some of his plein air studies, and I really love those because they are just drop dead gorgeous. I mean, little 8x12s that are just stunning.
Well, last year Ralph Oberg invited me to his home, and he has one of Bill Anton's paintings. And
wow.
He was telling me about his painting technique and all that. It was a beautiful painting. I'm glad I had the opportunity to see it up close. I hadn't seen one since the gallery, and I was such a naive person back then. I didn't even know how this thing worked.
Yeah.
You had to enter a drawing just to have the privilege to buy a painting.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he sold out. He sold out the entire show. I went later and visited that gallery again, and they told me, it was a complete sellout. I said, whoa, that's amazing. But it was his heart. It was his art that really struck my heart. So
yeah, well, he's got a great skill, and he could go in any direction he wanted. I mean, he could have been a great illustrator. And he told me that, he says, back when I started out in fine art, he says, as long as it was good, man, it was selling. But he says it's not that way anymore, which is, the business, everything has changed. There's more people out there, a lot of painters. The plein air movement has helped and hurt the representational art market. It's given a greater awareness to painting outside, but there is a preconceived notion with a lot of people and collectors and students that it's a style, and it's not. It's part of the process.
It has done good for some artists. That certainly has. I recognize that.
Yeah, no, but it's not my point is that it's not the end to the means. It's part of the process. It could be the finished product, but it's not necessarily. You look at historically, a lot of the best artists they're out constantly painting from life outdoors and bringing it inside. I mean, Sargent did that, and they all painted constantly from life. And some of these studies were it was a study, and that's what it was for observation later on for the finished product. So for the last 2 years, I was president of the Plein Air Painters of the Southeast, and we're trying to get that plein air message out there, as is, PAPA, Plein Air Painters of America. The message is that, this is part of the process.
Right.
It's not a style, because some galleries and collectors can think of it maybe just as a sloppy style. Well, they're just looking at it in a narrow perspective. It's part of the process.
I think that's a good distinction, because I think you're right. I've heard, in fact, coming across people, I've heard it referred to as a style. To me, it's just my style is going to be my style, whether I do it outside or inside. It's going to have my signature. Right.
Well, I got a great story. I got a great story about that. Don Demers.
Yeah.
Who he button things up very tight in the field. He's very, very accurate. So his paintings in the field don't look hardly any different than his finished studio painting. And then he had some people come up, and they're artists, and one lady was, someone that was involved in an organization, and she pointed out that this painting is not plein air. Well, and Don says, well, I beg to differ. I'm painting outside, and it is plein air. And she said, well, I should know, because I'm so and so, blah blah blah. And he says, yes, you should.
Yeah, well.
But I think we, as professional artists, that is part of the education that we have to give our students, is that is exactly what plein air is all about. It's observing. Like I said earlier, it's about the experience, being out there, and I mean, who doesn't want to be outside?
Yeah.
And I can combine being outside, my two loves, being outside and painting. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Well, but you also paint indoors. The way I met you was through David Boyd, who has been on this podcast earlier. He has a lovely gallery and basement studio in Newnan, Georgia.
I know. That's where I met you.
Yeah, and you did a demo, and you validated something that I did in my studio. I felt kind of guilty about.
What was that?
Because, people always talking about painting from photos and things like that, but I do use photos because I got to have a memory aid. But my wife had just bought me a 40-inch flat screen TV, and I got a rolling stand, and I put it in my studio next, near my canvas, so I can see. I can I can take a USB stick and plug it in and have my reference photos, or even a video. Sometimes you want to see the movement out there, so you see how things are going. And I thought, I like that. And then I walk into David's studio, and there you are, and you're using my setup.
Yeah.
I love it.
He stole it from you.
Well, I don't think he knew, but I remember.
David's that way. He's such a thief.
No, he didn't know that I even had. But I did send during your demo. I snapped a photo of it and I sent it to my wife and I said, "Man, he just validated my idea."
Well, the monitor is the best, way to view a photograph because it's not like a second generation like a print.
Yeah.
And you can adjust the value. So if you want to look into the shadows, you can lighten it or darken it or whatever. So it is the best. My wife is giving me a 30-inch monitor for my studio.
Nice.
I'm so surprised.
That she was nice to you? Come on.
Yeah, that's my Christmas present. I already know what I'm getting because I ordered it. But it makes a big difference if you can't be there on the spot. And taking really high quality photographs and learning how to do that only helps you more. And I learned that in illustration, that if you've got great photographs and a great photo shoot, then it's because what I did as an illustrator, painting moving figures, it's impossible to paint from life.
Right.
N.C. Wyeth set up models in his studio and painted from life. As budgets are today, it's impossible. And, I don't have a tremendous amount, 4 years to paint, do a book. So, yeah, having the best equipment to view is essential. And that demo that I did was about, and this is how I teach a lot of my students, is painting from the inside out, starting from a known 3 values. So I started right from his head. Where's the dark? Where's the mid-tone? Where's the light? And that's usually the lightest light, darkest dark is right there in the focal point. And then you work from the inside out because it required me to paint accurately because it's a figure. And that's the best teaching method I can approach that I could tell students. It doesn't mean you finish the painting. You can move around once you've got an established set of values and shape, and then you continue on and work the whole painting and create the harmony that you're looking for. But in the beginning stages, it's just that searching, and everything about painting is comparisons. So you're comparing one value to the other, and warm to cool, light and dark, and so that's what I wanted to convey during that demo.
It was a beautiful experience to see it come to life. It was also nice to see a figure in a painting like this.
Well, I like painting figures. It gives a bit of narrative to the painting, and going back to storytelling. It also gives scale to the painting and movement. And some of those paintings that the fisherman and that demo you saw, a lot of it gave the feeling was the ocean, because the figure was a small part of it, although it was the focal point. It gave you scale, but the waves and the movement around it were a huge part of the painting.
Yeah,
I like that. And that's I've used my granddaughter a bunch of times. She's my muse. And she's the most photographed painted child that has ever lived, I think.
Yeah, well, my grandkids are probably a close second then.
Yeah, right. I mean, I photographed the heck out of my kids because both of my girls posed for many of the children's books.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful.
When they got older, they were posing on book jackets, and my oldest daughter posed as a cave girl on a book.
Oh, that's wonderful. They'll have a great legacy of memories there.
Oh yeah. Well, we had a photo shoot here in my house with. I did a book about a retake of The Great Stone Face, which is a Nathaniel Hawthorne novel, and it's about the rock structure in New Hampshire that looked like a man's face, and is back in I don't know, early 2000s, it crumbled. So it's no longer there. But I had, the story takes you, the main character, through many stages and time periods where there's lots of different costumes. So I rented a bunch of costumes, and I had my buddy Hodge pose in all these different costumes with a Napoleon hat on, and then my wife had an old 1800s dress with bonnet, and we're posing out in the yard. And so at the end of the shoot, my girls, Moulin Rouge had just come out, the music video, and the girls wanted to do a video, and so they used my costume. So they were using the old Napoleon hat, and that's what went on in my house that day.
Yeah, the life of an artist.
Yeah.
Talk about materials and tools. What do you use? What do you like to use? What kind of surfaces you like to paint on? Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. I use a combination of the rosemary brushes and the Richardson brushes. I have a set that I worked on with them that's available. I go back and forth with those two sets of brushes. My paints are Williamsburg, and
that's a fine paint, yeah.
Yeah, the Williamsburg paint, how that came about was I started connecting with them. I guess it was the main motions director that contacted me and said, we want to send you some paint. And I emailed him back, and I said, well, if you want to send me paint on a regular basis, I'll promote it on my website, because I teach 8 to 10 workshops a year. And so I run into a lot of students who are looking for supplies. And so anyway, it's an ongoing thing. They fill my order when I need it. And so I use the large tubes, because it's, if you're paying for it, it's more economical to buy a large tube of paint. It just, when you go outside, it just definitely weights down your knapsack. But so I use those, and I use mineral spirits is Gamsol. I use Galcid Light is my medium, which I use in the initial stages, just as to tone the canvas. So you put a little bit in there just to let it set up a little bit.
Right.
I go between two different canvases: an oil prime Classens that I use, Classens number 13. And it's got
that's a real fine texture, isn't it? It's more.
Well, it's medium. I would say it's medium. Yeah, medium fine. Maybe 13. It's number 13. It's just single prime. Maybe if I did double prime, it might be a little smoother. But I like to leave some of that texture in the painting, and then I can go build up a lot of layers, so it has a lot of depth to it. I make my own panels. I buy gator board from a place in Tampa called Laird Plastics, and I buy a large 4 by 8 foot sheets. I think it's about $65. I buy the whole sheet, cut it up, take it back, and I use acrylic matte medium as my glue, and I coat the back of the canvas, and then I coat the surface that I'm going to apply it to. It's a 2-coat system. And then work it out with my hands and use a brayer. And so I make my own panels that way. It's much more economical. I go through tons of panels. When I left Florida in early October and didn't get back till it seemed like November, I had 25 panels with me in my car. It's a good way to go.
Well, that gator board, it's so light, and yet it's very strong.
Yes, it is, and it doesn't warp. And if I don't like the painting as an 18 by 24, I can cut it down to a 16 by 20. So it's very, you score it and snap it, and it's a great way to go.
What's the largest size painting would you or board you would make?
Oh, that's a good question. If beyond 24 by 30, it just gets a little bit cumbersome to put a big old canvas on there.
Yeah.
And it's just
For outdoor painting. Yeah.
Well, for anything. I mean, I don't go beyond. I did an 18 by 24 in Texas, and that's the largest size I'll ever paint. But for the studio, I want to go larger. I'll stretch, and the way I stretch is to do four corners and then work sort of from the center clockwise to the end, and then flip it center clockwise, flip it center clockwise as far as the staples go.
Right.
My buddy told me about that, and it makes the canvas tight as a drum. So that's, I'll stretch if I have to. I hate stretching canvases. I hate making panels. I just wish I had, like an assistant to do all that stuff, or just buy it that way. So sometimes I do, but if, I've got time, I'll make them. And it's the, stuff I don't like to do. But once you get the panels all set up, and then it's nice to go in the studio and grab a panel and just start throwing paint around. And if I paint on old canvas, sometimes I like doing that. Some of my that painting of the umbrellas that you like so much called Elba time, that was there's another painting underneath that.
Wow!
Because I
so
just
there's a story within Inception.
Yeah, there's a couple layers. You buy that painting, you're getting two paintings for one.
That's a bargain.
It's a bargain, yeah. So but I like it because it leaves some of that old stuff behind in the new painting, and it's kind of interesting.
It is. Yeah.
It forces me to cover that surface quickly and very abstractly, and then slowly build up. And I like that's a good approach because it keeps it fresh, and you build up layers, and there's a lot more nuance in that. Not that I want to rely on having to reconstitute old canvases, but I'll take them and sand them down. And so you sand them, scrape them, and get all that high stuff off and paint. And you can feel with your hand if it's, some surfaces, canvases are just too slick and it's not going to work. But some canvases, if you don't have a lot of, I don't want to like laboriously take old varnish off. I'm just looking at paintings that were maybe studies and paint on top of them. Why not use them?
Yeah. Wow, that's neat. On your website, you mentioned something I've never seen before. Live wedding painting. I've never heard of this.
It's been around. Some artists, that's one of their main things they do. I was approached. My gallery had a collector that wanted me to do one like that. Basically, it was the way I approached it. I said, "Well, I'll be out there. You got moving figures, which is extremely hard to do. Maybe if it's just two, one couple, maybe the married couple dancing on their first dance, that's fine. And then you just indicate people around. That's fine. But I had to paint like the whole wedding, people sitting in chairs while they're giving their vows. So what I did was went out 3 weeks or 2 weeks earlier, photographed the area at the time that the wedding was going to be, and then blocked it in the morning, went out there and started indicating where the chairs were. And then as soon as people sat down, I started just indicating people. And I indicated a few people. And then by the time I had a few people in and, I had the canvas kind of covered, guests could walk by and go, "Ooh, how cool is that? We think you're just wonderful." And not me, but the mother of the bride. And then I photographed heavily while I was doing it. And then I went back to the studio and finished it, which basically meant scraping off every figure that I painted and then repainting. Yeah, there was one I just recently saw by a Russ Kramer, who was a fellow at the American Society of Marine Artists, that I just became a fellow this past fall. And Russ did a live wedding painting, and this thing was spot on perfect. And man, that he's got some mad skills. So I've seen a lot of really bad ones, but that was the best one I ever saw.
How do you feel about doing them?
It's a keepsake. It's probably extremely difficult, but I would let them know exactly how I was going to approach it, just like I outlined, because it's to show people can see it happening. That's the fun part. It's a dog and pony show. It's you feel like you're a vase of flowers in the wedding, but I take photographs. And so then I would finish, in
the studio
painting. Yeah. To make it a good painting, not some cartoon figures.
Right. Not little carrots with a dot on the head.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's they want a painting, a decent painting. I'm not going to do that. I want to do something that's going to stand the test of time, and that this was a part of the their special day. And so but that's the best way I figure that you can do it, because you want to please the parents, and then you want to please the guests, and they see it happening. They like that. And ultimately, it's got to be tightened up back in the studio to where you can make these gestural things look like human figures.
Yeah.
I know what their end product, what they want, and I know what my role will be during the wedding. So if I can have some background done and then start indicating, that's the best way to handle that. And that's any professional illustrator would figure that one out.
You've mentioned how you teach a number of workshops. I had the privilege of seeing the demonstration at David Boyd's gallery. And I also saw recently posted at the Booth Museum, you are doing a 4-day plein air event with David Boyd.
Okay.
And another artist I'm not familiar with, Mark Hansen.
Right. Mark Hansen, one of the premier landscape painters in the country.
Well, see, I need to get to know this guy.
Yeah.
I need to have him on the show.
Yep. I definitely put him on your radar.
Yeah. So that's in October 2020. Yeah.
Yeah.
I highly recommend these booth events. I love the Booth Museum. I love what they're doing. I know Kent Mullinex there handling the Academy, so they're doing a great job.
It's a wonderful place, and I'm really looking forward to being up there. And we're going to have plein air painters of the Southeast. We're going to have their our museum show happening in January, so that's coming up.
Where would that be?
At the booth. It's the plein air painters of the Southeast.
That's in January. Okay.
Yeah, in January.
Somehow I missed that.
It's about mid-January, I think.
I'll have to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I've grown to know everybody in the organization, being president, and because I had to plan out these ads, and so I know their faces from doing ads and their artwork, and it's it is a fine organization. There's a lot of wonderful people, artists that are part of this, which really strengthens, and they show up and they work hard.
Well, I've heard a lot of good things about the plein air painters Southeast. I've heard nothing but good things about it, so I've got to check out one of the shows. So, yeah.
Yeah, come on by.
Yeah. I really appreciate you being on The Artful Painter. Where can people find out more about you? What's the best place or the one source you want them to go to jump off and learn about you?
Carl, I would just say my website.
Okay.
It's just billfarnsworth.com. And, you can Google my name, and, lot of stuff comes up about me. I'm the number one Bill Farnsworth because nobody else wants to do it.
But you're a good Bill Farnsworth. You do a good job being Bill Farnsworth. So
I hope so.
Love your work, man. And I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me and my audience here at the Artful Painter.
Yeah. This was a privilege, and I appreciate you inviting me.
I'm grateful to Bill for taking the time to talk with us in this episode. A lot of great information in there that really resonated with me. So I appreciate him taking the time to talk with us. You can find out more about Bill at his website, billfarnsworth.com. You can find a link to his website as well as to a few other resources that were mentioned in this episode. You'll find them in the blog post and the show notes for this episode. I continue to get feedback. I've gotten a lot of feedback on Instagram, on YouTube, and social media, which I deeply appreciate. I also got this email, and I'll share it with you before we close out here. This is from Daniel McCoy. He says, "Hello, Carl. I am enjoying your podcast, The Artful Painter. I like that they're downloadable as I put them on a thumb drive and listen while I'm driving. To augment my retirement, I work part-time delivering auto parts, and your podcast have made the time a refreshing change from the news of today. Thanks, Carl, for what you're doing and making the podcast available. They are a tremendous asset." Daniel, thank you so much for your kind words. I am glad that they're making a difference for you. I am not a guy that likes to listen to the news on the radio or TV or anywhere. It's not that I'm oblivious to what's going on to the world, and sometimes I do scan the headlines, but I cannot stand the negativity that's out there. So I'd rather talk about and listen to things that are upbuilding. And this podcast gives me an opportunity to share informative, inspiring conversations with, I get inspired by them. And so hopefully you as a listener are inspired by them as well. By the way, I'd like to mention too, you're the first person to tell me that you download the episodes onto a thumb drive. That's great. In fact, that is a feature in the player for the podcast and on my website. So you can do that. You can also use Apple Podcasts, the app if you have an iPhone, Google Podcasts, or you can download it there. It's available in Stitcher, radio.com. I think it's available there, as well as several other places. So there's all kinds of different ways to listen to it. I personally listen to podcasts using the app Overcast. I don't know if it's just an iPhone app or is it available for Android. I don't know. But it is available for iPhones. I like it because I can download an episode almost immediately as it appears in the stream. Sometimes it takes Apple Podcast a while for the episode to actually show up after it's been updated. Anyhow, it's great to hear how you're listening to the show. And I appreciate that feedback, Daniel. Thank you. I love hearing from everyone. If you'd like to send me a note, ask a question, tell me about your studio, your art, doesn't matter. If you just want to have a conversation, send me an email. You can do that by going to carlolson.tv and click the contact tab. Thank you for listening to The Artful Painter. I'll see you in the next episode.
Picture on the TV.